the Russia investigation. The news that President Trump's former National Security Adviser Michael Flynn has just pleaded guilty to a charge of lying to the FBI about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador to the United States last December after Trump was elected. Elected President Flynn's plea, entered in U.S. District Court in Washington just moments ago, is the latest and strongest indication that he may now be cooperating with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the Trump campaign and its dealings with Russia. Flynn, who resigned as National Security Advisor in February after serving just 24 days, is now the fourth Trump official to be charged in the Mueller investigation. NBC News Justice Department correspondent Pete Williams is following all this and has the latest from our bureau here in Washington. Pete, what do you know?
Well, the FBI says that he lied to the agents twice in a meeting they had 4 days after the president was elected, January 24th. About his conversations with the Russian ambassador. They say he talked to the ambassador once on December 22nd, urging the Russians to either abstain or delay a vote in the UN regarding Israel. And then a week later, according to prosecutors, Flynn denied that he met with the Russian or talked to the Russian ambassador again about trying to get Russia to moderate its response to the UN Security Council, or rather to the Obama administration's decision to impose sanctions that were announced just that very day against Russia because of meddling in the election. So by denying the conversations, the FBI says he broke the law. Now, it's a single count. It's a felony, as a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, but it's doubtful, Lester, that he'd get any prison time for two reasons. It's a plea deal. It means both sides get something. He gets what's in essence the least serious charge that the government could have been brought here. But the government in return, Mueller's prosecutors, get his cooperation. So this is a sign that he's already been cooperating with them, and he has to continue to do so, because if he doesn't, they could ask for a harsh sentence or they could file additional charges. I think you have to ask one other question here, Lester, and that is, why would he lie to the FBI about conduct that is arguably, probably either not illegal or potentially violated a law, the Logan Act, that's never really been prosecuted in modern times, for talking to the Russians before the president was inaugurated? The question here is, why wouldn't he tell the truth about these conversations? Was he trying to cover up for someone else? Did someone else tell him to talk to the Russians? Did the president, for example, tell him to do this? So that's one question, undoubtedly, that Mueller's prosecutors will be getting to with him. And he won't be sentenced now for months. So that gives the government additional leverage over him to get his continued cooperation, Lester.
And Pete, walk us through this. You've covered these sorts of things before. How do these deals go down? Does the person say, I've got X, Y, and Z, or I've got something good? If you give me a lesser charge, I'll tell you what it is.
Well, the government would go to him first. The prosecutors would go to him first and say, look, you've got exposure here. We believe that you lied to us. We're prepared to charge you with a lot of other things unless you can agree to talk to us. So it's a dance between initially his lawyers and the prosecutors, and then at some point he makes what's in essence a proffer. Okay, if we get this deal, here's what I'm prepared to tell you, and they would try, in other words, they wouldn't give him the deal without knowing what they're going to get in return.
That's the point. All right. Thanks, Pete. We're going to go back to you in a second. Let me go to NBC's Kristen Welker at the White House. Kristen, the president had spoken out in support of General Flynn some time back. Do we expect to hear from him today?
It's possible, Lester. Here's what we know so far. We do know that according to one White House official, President Trump has been notified, but the White House is not yet officially commenting. We are working our sources to get more information. Now, the Russia probe, for context here, is the single issue that looms over this White House larger than anything else. It's also what gets under the president's skin more than any other issue. The revelation that Michael Flynn will plead guilty to lying to the FBI will undoubtedly be met with concerns among many in the president's inner circle who have told me in the past they worry Flynn could reveal information that could potentially be damaging to the president, although officially the White House has said Flynn does not have any information that could hurt the president. Now, Flynn was foreign policy advisor on the Trump campaign and transition all before joining the Trump White House. He was one of the president's first high-profile top advisors, so he knows a lot. This comes after NBC News reported weeks ago that the pressure has been intensifying around Flynn. Federal investigators had at that point gathered enough evidence to bring charges in their investigation of Flynn. It also comes after lawyers for Flynn last week notified the president's legal team that Flynn would no longer share information with them as they had been doing regularly. That was our first sign that Flynn was cooperating with investigators. Flynn, just to recap, is under scrutiny for his foreign lobbying work involving Russia and also Turkey, and was fired after just 24 days on the job for lying to the vice president about his contacts with the Russian ambassador during the transition. Now, as you point out, Lester, President Trump hasn't spoken recently about Flynn, but during an interview with you months ago, the president called Flynn a very good person. And then back in March, Mr. Trump tweeted this: Mike Flynn should ask for immunity in that this is a witch hunt, excuse for big election loss by media and Dems of historic proportion. The president has consistently tried to cast the Russia probe as a witch hunt, as a hoax. But this development, Lester, is yet another potential complication in that narrative. Lester.
And it may be too early to know, Kristen, but there are congressional investigations looking at some of these same matters. Does this affect those at all?
It will certainly be of interest to congressional investigators. And Lester, we should note that the New York Times overnight reporting that President Trump pressed some members of the Senate Intelligence Committee to essentially wrap up their investigation into Russia, again underscoring this notion that the Russia probe looms over, complicates his entire administration and agenda. He sees it as a threat to his presidency. So this will undoubtedly factor into the investigations on Capitol Hill as well, Lester.
And let me get Pete Williams to weigh in on that same question with regard, Pete, to these congressional investigations. Is there any sharing between the information they glean versus what the Mueller team is getting?
Well, it's pretty limited, and that's been a source of frustration for members of Congress. But the government doesn't want to basically get information to Congress that could jeopardize their investigation. If they tell members of Congress what they're learning, and they've been doing some of this. It started with Comey, it's been continuing with Mueller. But the problem here is if you tell congressional investigators something and they start asking witnesses about that, then it begins to color what potential witnesses might say. So yeah, there is some cooperation, but it's limited.
All right, let me bring in our political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, how does this, we don't know what he is going to say or if in fact he is cooperating, let's presume, but how might this affect how much the White House wants to say and this presidency?
Well, look, it's Mike Flynn, the president, the reason Bob Mueller has a job as the special prosecutor is the president was desperate to protect Mike Flynn. He has gone out on a limb for Mike Flynn. The whole point of the naming of Bob Mueller was because he went to James Comey, the then FBI director, and asked for leniency on Mike Flynn. The president has acted as if he's very concerned about what Mike Flynn knows, what he may have to say. So, look, by the way, the president has himself, this has been a pretty erratic week with the president when it comes to his statements on Twitter and everything. And if you back time this, Lester, to when the president himself found out that Flynn's lawyers were no longer cooperating about 10 days ago, since then, the president's been on a tear, if you will, on various issues, not just attacking, normal opponents, but all over the place. I think the president is clearly rattled by this development.
Well, there are those who admire this president for his unfiltered way of talking and dealing with various issues. In this case, are some of those moments now about to come back and bite him?
It is. I mean, you have already the one tweet we talked about that Kristen Welker brought up earlier. We've got the interview with you, with what he has said about the firing of Comey, which in itself, I think, only added to the potential long list of pieces of evidence that Mueller has on the president potentially obstructing justice here. So, look, it is, and I think that's why you haven't seen the president tweet yet. And in this case, it looks like the president's listening to advice that says, think first before you tweet on this one.
All right, I want to bring in Andrea Mitchell right now. She is joining us on the telephone. Andrea, can you give us a little more insight into the conversations that were the subject of these charges today in terms of what was lied about and what the nature of the conversations were?
Yes, indeed, Lester. There are two conversations that are critical to this. Both were in December of 2016. One on December 22nd was with the Russian ambassador, Ambassador Kislyak. And in that conversation, Flynn is acknowledging that he lied to the FBI subsequently about his telling the Russian ambassador he wanted Russia to go against U.S. foreign policy, Obama policy at the time, and oppose or actually defeat a pending UN resolution that would have declared Israel's settlements in Palestinian territory illegal. In other words, the Obama White House and State Department were going against Benjamin Netanyahu, were opposing Israel in this by abstaining at the UN, planning to abstain. And so President-elect Trump was critical of that, siding with Netanyahu. And Michael Flynn, the incoming National Security Advisor, was in touch with Russia, getting Russia to go against U.S. policy at the UN behind the scenes. The second that he is acknowledging today he lied about when questioned by the FBI is on December 29th. This was after President Obama had sanctioned Russia for meddling in the election by expelling dozens of diplomats, Russian diplomats from the U.S., and by closing compounds, one in New York, one in Maryland, in suburban Washington, D.C. And this was a conversation that he denied to the FBI, where he clearly was overheard by U.S. intelligence, telling the Russian ambassador that Vladimir Putin should not overreact, should not expel American diplomats, because the incoming Trump administration would reverse those Obama sanctions. So that is why, very suspiciously at the time, we all reported on nightly news and elsewhere that the Putin failure to retaliate against Obama's sanctions against Russia was highly unusual, in fact, unprecedented, Lester.
But were those conversations in and of themselves illegal or in a gray area, or was it the fact that he was not truthful about him is the bigger issue?
You might have made an argument of the Logan Act or treason, but that's never been prosecuted. You could argue it was improper, unprecedented for an incoming president to go against outgoing president's foreign policy. I don't think very many lawyers would argue that you could get a conviction for that. So the fact that he lied about it is the issue, and that is why he is pleading guilty, because he became instantly in legal jeopardy. Perhaps the overlying issue of whether or not there was collusion on Russian meddling is at the back of his mind. One doesn't know his motivation for lying. Perhaps he didn't want to acknowledge contact with about the election and the sanctions because of what a hot potato that was. But you're absolutely right. If he hadn't lied, maybe they would have gotten him on something else, or maybe a less serious charge, which was not registering as a foreign agent with Turkey. But you're absolutely right. It's the fact of the lie that, again, has caused the problem, and that's what we've seen in the past.
All right, this hearing, the guilty plea being uttered here just a few minutes ago in the courthouse. I want to go back to Pete Williams right now, who's been reading through some of the documents related to all this. What are you seeing that's standing out, Pete?
Well, very interesting things are in these documents. The government says, in basically laying out the case against Michael Flynn, that he first contacted the Russian ambassador. Their first conversation was December 22nd, after Egypt introduced this Security Council resolution about Israeli settlements. And according to the documents, a very senior member of the presidential transition team directed Flynn to reach out to officials from foreign governments, including Russia, to learn where each of them stood on the resolution and try to get them to delay or defeat the resolution. And it says on December 22nd, he contacted the Russian ambassador about the vote, told the Russian ambassador that the Trump administration, the incoming administration, opposed this resolution and asked Russia to vote against it. Then it says on December 28th, that's 6 days after the earlier conversation, the ambassador called Michael Flynn. And this was the day before the Obama administration announced these sanctions against Russia for its meddling in the election. And then it says the next day, Flynn called a senior official in the presidential transition team, which was meeting down in Mar-a-Lago, Florida at the resort, at the Trump resort, to ask what, if anything, he should tell the Russian ambassador about these sanctions that had been announced. And Flynn, according to the documents, and this presidential transition official talked about the sanctions, including the potential impact of the sanction on the Trump administration's foreign policy goals. And according to the documents, this transition official, who is not identified in the documents, and Flynn talked about the members of the team and how they didn't want Russia to escalate the situation. So it says immediately after that call, Flynn called the ambassador back and asked Russia not to escalate the situation and only to respond to the sanctions in a reciprocal manner. And then it says, after talking to the Russian ambassador, Flynn talked to senior members of the presidential transition team about those conversations regarding the sanctions and Russia's decision not to escalate the situation. Now, also, Lester, the defense team for Michael Flynn has now issued a statement, a written statement. He has not talked, which is not unusual in a situation like this, but the written statement says, and I'll just read it, it's fairly short. It says, after over 33 years of military service to our country, including nearly 5 years in combat away from my family, and then my decision to continue to serve the United States, it has been extraordinarily painful to endure these many months of false accusations of, quote, treason and other outrageous acts. Such false accusations are contrary to everything I have ever done and stood for. And then the statement goes on to say, but I recognize that the actions I acknowledged in court today were wrong, and through my faith in God, I'm working to set things right. My guilty plea and agreement to cooperate with the special counsel's office reflect a decision I made in the best interest of my family and of our country. I accept full responsibility for my actions. Lester.
So where did the dots connect based on what you just, the information you found in those documents? Where might they lead?
Well, the question is, who in the transition team was he talking to? Undoubtedly, he's already told Mueller's Mueller's special prosecutors about those conversations. And they're going to want to know more about the president's role in all of this. Did the president ask him to do this personally? Did the president direct people in the transition team to have Flynn do this? That's where the dots go, and undoubtedly Mueller's team already has a good deal of information from Michael Flynn about this, or he wouldn't have gotten what is in essence a pretty sweetheart deal here. Because one of the documents says, Lester, that in addition to other things that Flynn did wrong, is that it says March 7th of 2017, he filed several documents with the Justice Department about representing foreign agents and made false statements in those documents, falsely stating he didn't know or to what extent Turkey was involved in a project that he had been working on that was focused on improving business organizations' confidence in doing business. And he omitted that officials of Turkey provided supervision and directions over this project, that he published an article in a newspaper. So they could have charged him with that too, but they chose not to.
All right, I want to go to Kristen Welker back at the White House. Kristen, any update now when we may see the president, and are you hearing anything from the West Wing?
No update on when we may see the president, Lester. We do know that he is going to be meeting with his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, as well as his Defense Secretary, James Mattis, today. Right now, no plans for that to be something that reporters can capture and take pictures of, but we will undoubtedly be pressing for access to him today. I can tell you, Lester, that I just spoke with someone who is very close to the president who describes this development as very, very bad. It underscores the fact that this will cause significant concerns within this West Wing, within the president's inner circle, about what Michael Flynn might know and what he might say. And now that we have this statement from Michael Flynn saying that he is in fact cooperating with investigators, that will undoubtedly just add to all of those concerns. Now, this is all developing, Lester, as there are already significant things going on behind the scenes here at the White House, including mounting reports about the fact that the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, may be on his way out in the new year. Yesterday, the White House pushed back against those reports, but when the president was asked about them, he didn't exactly deny it. He said the Secretary of State is here. That was his only response. And then, of course, this lunch that he's having with the Secretary of State today. So there's already some internal discord going on. these headlines undoubtedly adding to all of that, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thanks. Back to Chuck Todd. Chuck, this administration had been hoping to celebrate passage of a tax bill, which may or may not happen today in the U.S. Senate, now facing this. How does this affect the dynamic between the president and his own party now?
Look, I think it actually doesn't impact. It's already been a shotgun marriage at best anyway. I think you'll see a bunch of Republicans right now try to speed up their attempts to get this tax bill passed, get this president to sign it, and then I think you'll see a lot of distancing. I want to point out something, though. You were asking about connecting the dots to Pete Williams here. This could bring it. Remember who was directing in the national security aspects of the transition? It was the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The vice president-elect at the time, Mike Pence, was officially in charge of the transition, but he was primarily focused on filling a lot of the domestic parts of the cabinet. Jared Kushner was the one doing a lot of shuttle diplomacy, had his hands in all of this, and so keep an eye on all things Jared Kushner when it comes to who it is specifically that ordered Mike Flynn to do this with the Russians when he said it was the Trump transition. Well, in this case, does that mean Mike Pence? Does that mean the president-elect? Or could it mean Jared Kushner?
All right, Chuck, thanks. Kristen Welker back at the White House. You've got news there.
Ty Cobb, the president's special counsel, his lawyer who is working on the Russia probe, just releasing a statement. Lester, let me read it to you in full. He says, today, Michael Flynn, a former national security advisor at the White House for 25 days during the Trump administration, and a former Obama administration official entered a guilty plea to a single count of making a false statement to the FBI. The false statements involved mirror the false statements to the White House officials, which resulted in his resignation in February of this year. Nothing about the guilty plea or the charge implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again that the special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clears the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion. Now, of course, that is what the president and his legal team are working toward. And I can tell you that once Ty Cobb started working with the president here at the White House, his philosophy has been to be very forthcoming with information, with documentation. He has said he wants this wrapped up quickly and believes that is the best way to make this happen. So the talking point from the White House is that, look, this is one step closer to this investigation being concluded. But of course, again, the very real concerns within the president's inner circle are what exactly will Michael Flynn say, and will it in any way harm the president or those closest to him, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as Chuck Todd was just talking about. Lester.
Kristen Welker at the White House, thank you very much. And once again, to recap, if you're just joining us, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleading guilty in federal court of lying to the FBI about a conversation with the Russian ambassador to the United States, and is now presumably cooperating with the special counsel's investigation into possible collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign. We will be back on the air shortly if President Trump comes out in public, if he makes comments on today's developments. So stand by for that. In the meantime, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News Washington.